Clear title. They should change that song. It should say clear title, right?
That's what I'm here for, yeah.
Welcome back to the Stockwell Roche Show. I'm Jason Stockwell with Remax Results.
I'm John Van Hall with Remax Results.
We have a packed house with loads of experts in here for you today, folks. And one thing I want to start off right away talking or sharing with this segment is tips. We always want to have takeaways for you. So let's say you are someone who is looking to buy a home. You are renting. You have reached your peak or up to your eyeballs, or you've reached the limit and said, I'm done paying $1,700, $1,800, $2,000, $2,200, who knows how much a month in rent, or even whatever it is, $1,500. I am going to buy. Rates are good, and I can get approved now. Tips for you or people you know that are in that situation: when you're buying a home, and you may be buying it with an FHA loan, you might be putting FHA financing on that. Every time you do an FHA loan, and Jason is an expert on this, so he can probably go into this in more detail, but you get an FHA loan, they do an appraisal, just like every bank does. They do an appraisal to make sure the value of the property is there. FHA loans go a little further on their appraisal because they're checking for certain items for safety and other factors. Some of the common FHA appraisal work orders that come back, and this is maybe you've heard this story from someone who bought a home recently and had an FHA loan, or this is something you can look out for. But they'll go through the house and they'll say, hey, this, and this needs to be fixed. Now the seller goes, oh, I got to do that. I thought we were all done. We already had our inspection. No. Now this is the bank's inspection. So here's what they are. Inadequate access to egress from bedrooms from the exterior of the home. Leaking or worn out roof. If there's any sign of wear or tear on the roof, if they don't feel that it's, I believe, 5 years or longer, they will flag it. Evidence of structural problems, foundation, if there's any settling or cracking. These are the most common, folks. These are the most common work orders for FHA appraisals. Defective paint surfaces. I see this one all the time. On homes built prior to 1978. Chipping, peeling paint on the house.
Don't say that.
Has to be dealt with. It has to be dealt with. Kitchen and bath do not have adequate or acceptable sources of water for fixtures and are leaking or dripping. That should be fixed anyway. But basements and crawl spaces have signs of water or dampness in the basement. Potential structural problems. And lastly, insufficient heating source in habitable rooms. So that addition that someone put on back in 1970 on your 1940s house, they didn't run ductwork. So they put in a little space heater, and it might not be kicking out enough heat or even working for that matter. So, that would be flagged. So those are some common things that you see on the FHA appraisal for work orders that you want to watch out for. So if you're selling, that's good tips. Take care of that.
You see similar items like that, Jason, on your end?
Absolutely, and it's actually VA and FHA.
VA and FHA?
Sure.
HUD-based appraisals. Other ones that I see common are handrails and cracked windows.
Yes.
And always have to have access to the attic. Sometimes those are sealed off, and that's not that big of a deal. But, yeah, they're definitely an animal that you have to be a little bit more proactive with.
And that is a good point. The cracked windows and the handrails, they're looking for safety stuff.
It's all safety.
On the FHA, yeah. And then the other thing, too, when you're selling, I've met with many sellers recently that are going on the market. And one thing I heard from another real estate agent down in another state, I believe it was North Carolina. Another great tip for you is that when an agent comes in and does a presentation to sell your home and they give you a price, it may not always match your price that you have in mind. In fact, it rarely does, frankly. Usually your price might be higher, but it's close, right? You have a workable range. What happens is, though, when the real estate agent, when we go and put your house on the market, John, myself, Josh, or all these agents out there put your house on the market for sale, we are trying to find one buyer that will pay that price for your house, an acceptable price to you. So we've sold it to that buyer, and they are sold, and now they believe that they've got that house and they've got that price, and it's a meeting of the minds, they call it, and everybody's happy, hopefully. We, as real estate agents, our work isn't done selling your house. We now have to sell it to the bank who's financing that buyer. So now we have to sell that appraiser that home is actually worth that price, especially in cases where your price or your home may be the creme de la creme. It might be the top one in the neighborhood. It might be the highest priced unit in your building in a long time. we have to do the due diligence and work to sell it to that appraiser as well, because if that appraiser isn't sold, even though the buyer was sold on that price and the appraiser doesn't believe it's worth it, they're going to come back with a low appraisal, which happens now, and that has to be dealt with by you, the seller. Maybe the buyer comes up and pays for it all. Maybe you split it, or maybe, like many buyers, they say, I don't want to overpay for something.
Right.
Isn't that what everybody doesn't want to do and make a mistake? So they back out, and now you're stuck back on the market. And now if it's an FHA appraiser, you're 6 months tied to that value. You have to sell to a conventional loan or some other means, and it really hinders the seller. So there's a lot of things that have been favorable in the marketplace for sellers. That segment or that piece about appraisals and FHA appraisals, in my opinion, has not. It's actually hurt sellers in some cases. Anyway, that's a tip. So call us, 651-400-0773, 651-400-0773 if you have any more questions about selling or any questions at all. We're happy to help. So let's go back. Jeremy Green.
Hi.
Talk more with you about financial planning. I'm reading your bio here, and the only letters I have after my name is Jason Stockwell, and then BS for Bachelor's of Science degree. From Gustavus, by the way.
I always thought that meant something else.
Gustavus is a great college, and I do have a
Just
bachelor's.
kidding,
I think it's
guys.
BA they call it to be safe. I don't know. Anyway, Jeremy Green. Let me read this. Jeremy Green. And they always say, the old adage is, the more letters you have after your name, the more credible you are, and the more credible you are, and the more expert you are. The more numbers you have after your name, it's not necessarily a good thing. Right? Because that's what they do in prison.
That's what they do in prison, buddy.
Gosh.
So Jeremy Green, CFP, CTFA, CLU, CEBS, MSF, or MSFS, AEP, AE. Wow.
Whoa.
It's almost the whole alphabet.
These are not hashtags, folks.
So we don't have to get into detail of what all those mean. Bottom line is, you know what you're doing. You've studied. You have a lot of credentials. And what we're talking about today is how to help. Our show is how to help consumers or to help people that with their finances, with their life, what's going on. So what in your experience you have on here that you have expertise in? Wealth management, wealth transfer, estate planning, charitable gift, counseling, investments, trust, life insurance, all those things. On our previous show, we've talked about setting a healthcare directive, setting a will, estate planning, all those things as a critical must for families, especially. Any other things that nuggets or tidbits of information that you think or topics you think would be great?
Just to wrap that up, since you start with estate planning, essentially, I think for most people, the average person that doesn't have what I would call a federally taxable estate, that's the vast majority of Americans. So if you're wondering if you have that, you have to have, if you're married, you have to have a $10.5 million net worth. And
so for those of you out there like me, and I don't know, maybe Jason might be over that. I don't know, Jason Light here maybe, but anybody else out there who has under $10.5 million, the vast majority of Americans, you're in the what called?
you have a non-taxable estate.
Non-taxable estate.
So
if you're over that, call me and call us, and we can get you into some real estate investments.
Yeah, so what you mentioned about people who don't have a taxable estate, yeah, sure. I mean, a will and or a revocable trust and healthcare directive is fine. I would say the one other thing to tie in the other aspects of the finances, I would say, is tying in possibly some life insurance to fund whatever plans you have. And by that, I mean, as an example, you typically want to have whatever your estate planning document says. Let's say you have young children or children that are still dependent on you, or some who's depending on you. You might have some kind of trust set up for your children if you were passed away, because you want to make sure that some money went directly to their children. However, a minor can't manage money. In fact, it can't even be in their name. And a court would say that too. So effectively, you need to have either your spouse have that money, which you may or may not be comfortable with completely leaving everything to her or him. You might like something in their name that legally has to go to them, and that would be in trust. And that's what a trust does, just so you're aware if you're not familiar with what a trust does. A trust essentially is nothing more than a set of instructions that can hold assets typically at a bank or institution that is not funded till you have a source to fund those plans. In other words, your will says everything to my wife, but I want to leave $200,000 to the kids for their education, just in case my wife got remarried or something. I want to make sure that money absolutely goes to the kids. you trust or love your wife, but just want to make sure it's in their name. She could even be the trustee, or he could even be the trustee of the spouse. But what happens is your life insurance, let's say it's some just basic term insurance, doesn't need to be something fancy or expensive. If you were killed in an auto accident or something, it would pay out at your death and fund that trust. So the beneficiary of your life insurance would be the testamentary trust, testamentary meaning after you pass away, trust created in the will of, let's say, my name, Jeremy Green, in my example. So why I'm mentioning this is your estate planning document should implement, or should integrate with your life insurance or funding mechanism. So you may have some personal savings, but frankly, a lot of people, they don't have, let's say in that example, I gave $200,000 just sitting around to fund a plan like that. That's a perfect thing because term insurance is so cheap. So you buy some, for let's say you're a 35-year-old male, maybe you buy $500,000 of life insurance, $500,000. That's you're probably looking at $300,000 or $400,000 or $300 a year. I'm sorry, $300 or $400 a year.
$300 to $400 a year.
Yep.
So, Jeremy, loads of information right there. Some of it, if you're watching us on YouTube, it went right. Oh, and we have donuts here too, by the way, on our show. So I just want to entice anybody to get. So go on YouTube, check us out, and look at the nice, beautiful donuts. But some of that went right over my. Some of that went right over my head. So people can reach out to you, and you will help guide them based on their situation on where to go for certain services. Correct?
Well, I usually work with financial advisors. So I actually
Okay.
give advice to financial advisors on their practices, typically with federally taxable states.
So financial advisors can reach out to you.
No, clients can actually, that's what I typically do. Having said that, individual clients can
Individual
contact
clients
me.
can too. Okay.
And I will reach out to them and help them connect with the right resources.
Awesome. So we'll give Jeremy's information when we get back, and we'll have more talking about title and John Van Hall's house.